Welcome, and thank you for joining us live, or if you're on the recording, catching us on the recording for episode 14 of Dr. Jeff Talks About Sex and Intimacy, Reclaiming Sexuality After Purity Culture. I am so humbled and so honored that you took time out of your amazingly busy life to be with us, so thank you for that. We are out there on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on X, all these social media sites. So don't forget we're out there, and we're on Facebook. We do need followers so that we can stream live there. You can watch us on Facebook, of course, but we will be able to stream live when we get enough followers. So please, if you're a Facebook person, follow us. We so appreciate it. Go to our website. The website is where you can watch previous awesome episodes with great guests. You can see what's coming up each week. So please go to the website to find out what's coming up, because we have some really exceptional people coming on, and I don't want you to miss that. So please look at the website. Also, we're out there. You can listen to us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, whatever your favorite podcast listening device is. You can listen to us in the car. Please do so. We're happy to have you join us. Please know that you are completely welcome. Whatever your sexual orientation, whatever your gender identity, whatever your relationship style, you are welcome, most welcome in this space to learn. I'm so glad you're here. So the goal of the podcast, it's really pretty simple. It is to empower and enlighten you with evidence-based information that you need to improve your sexual health and to deepen your relationships. Well, for many people out there, religion plays a meaningful and a grounding role in life. But when it comes to sexuality, religious teachings can sometimes send messages that leave lasting marks, especially when those messages center around shame, around silence, and control. In purity culture, being good is often equated with being sexually pure, usually defined by abstinence, modesty, and strict rules about when and how sexuality is allowed to be expressed. Instead of fostering curiosity, joy, and informed consent, these messages can instill deep feelings of guilt, confusion, and fear, especially when someone begins to explore their desires or steps outside of those rigid expectations. So whether you've personally experienced purity culture or other trauma from religious or cultural teachings, this conversation tonight is about healing, reclaiming joy, and embracing the fullness of who you are without shame. So take a breath, settle in, and let's begin this important presentation and conversation. I am so happy to have our guest this evening to join us, because this was something that you came up with. You wanted to hear about this specific topic. Our listeners brought this to my attention. And so I looked out there to find an expert, and I found a wonderful person who's going to share expertise with us this evening, and that is Tovah Means. She is the founder and co-owner of Watch Hill Therapy, a trauma specialty therapy practice in downtown Chicago. Now, Tovah and her team specialize in treating complex trauma in children, teens, and adults. Tovah received her Master's of Marriage and Family Therapy from the renowned Family Institute right here in Chicago, up in Evanston at Northwestern University. In addition to her clinical work, Tovah teaches and consults regularly in Chicagoland and to therapists around the country. And she's a great resource for relationship, sexuality, and trauma. I'm so pleased to have you here this evening. Thank you so much for joining me on Dr. Jeff Talks About Sex and Intimacy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, without further ado, I can't wait. I've seen her presentation and we've talked a few times about it, and you're going to learn a lot tonight. So let's get started.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you so much, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. It is a challenge and an honor to be here discussing purity culture today. And it's a blend of my own personal story with my professional world. And so it's a sort of unique opportunity for me to speak on both. So thank you so much. We're going to spend the next 25 to 30 minutes talking about purity culture. And I'll be using some examples of my personal life, but then I'll also share some examples of couples I've worked with who have come out of purity culture. And I can't wait to answer questions and have further discussion after the presentation. So, like Jeff said, I am a co-owner and therapist at Watch Hill Therapy. It's a group of psychotherapy practice clinicians who specialize in PTSD, complex PTSD, and dissociation. But a little bit about my background first and how I even sort of got here. I was raised in New England by a Presbyterian minister and a Jewish Presbyterian minister father and a Jewish mother. And really, evangelical Christianity dominated the way I was raised. And just to note today, we're talking about Christianity, especially the evangelical branch, but they're in across religions. It might not be called purity culture, but there are similar mandates for men, women, and children to follow a certain structure or order in their religious life that looks similar to purity culture. So I just wanted to name that. We'll specifically be talking about Christianity today, but this is happening to people across religions all over the world. I was able to leave where I grew up and attend college outside of Philly, which sort of started to help loosen the reins of the impact of purity culture in my life. And then I became a therapist at the Family Institute at Northwestern, and I stayed in Chicago. And my life in Chicago was really the place where I deconstructed purity culture and where I deconstructed a lot of other toxic religious culture ideology in general. I now identify myself as pretty much agnostic, and I value religion, and especially for cultural reasons. But I through my own deconstruction process, that's kind of where I landed. So today we're really going to be talking about the intersection of where purity culture and purity culture's teachings and trauma come into play. And so just a tiny bit around trauma, and then we'll talk about purity culture. But trauma, it's a really big concept. We look at it on a spectrum. So as human beings, we can all experience trauma, and most of us do. And now we're also learning that intergenerationally, our ancestors experience trauma and they pass that down to us. And that we are wired to disconnect from our bodies when we're experiencing trauma. Trauma that happens in relationships, which is really the sweet spot of my work and my practice, makes traumatic experiences shape us so much more than we ever would want them to. And so when we're looking at purity culture, we're really looking at how religious organizations and families can traumatize their young, growing children by telling them messages of shame-based thought around sexuality. So just a really little brief clip here. Purity culture is a set of evangelical Christian beliefs that emphasizes strict gender roles. It believes in abstinence, modesty. The basic teachings stress abstinence only, mentality for both women and men, and queer people. By the way, it's not just straight people. Individuals learn to view sexual activity as reserved for marriage, or in if you're not binary, if you're not, choosing like a male-female relationship, then it actually tells people that they have to be abstinent for the rest of their lives. And leaders discourage dating, moving in together, sexual exploration of any kind. And it's really about perpetuating unhealthy ideas of sexuality. And it leads to really long-term impacts if you don't get help, if you don't get support from those communities. So the second paragraph is kind of interesting. The modern concept of purity culture gained popularity in the 90s. Most notable was the 1993 True Love Waits campaign. And I don't know if any of you here actually had to grow up during that. I did. It brought large crowds of adolescents making public pledges of abstinence, and not even abstinence, but like no sexual contact at all. And when my first year in college, I actually was sitting in my huge college auditorium, just getting through the introduction sessions and things like that, when we were actually told that the author of the book of True Love Waits was going to talk to us. And so I had to sit through an entire presentation, and it was really, I didn't quite understand it at the time why it felt so wrong, but it just felt so wrong. There was a lot of praise for people waiting. It just felt like a huge cultural movement. It felt like if you love God, this is what you're doing. And people much younger, all the way to their, late teens, early 20s, were being encouraged not to date and not to have any sexual experience before that. So I like Dr. Laura Anderson. You can follow her on social media. I took this quote from her. But this is really where trauma comes into play. Purity culture disconnects people from their bodies by teaching them that their natural desires, feelings, and physical sensations are sinful or dangerous. Instead of viewing their body as a part of their identity, they learn to see it as a source of temptation, something to control, suppress, and even dissociate from. So that kind of Dr. Laura talks about how that kind of conditioning really disconnects you from your body. And that's the first step in being traumatized. So when you think about having a really overwhelming, scary incident like an accident, it might not cause PTSD, but it will temporarily remove your experience from your body so that you can survive whatever the in the moment overwhelm is. When it comes to chronic trauma, however, like being in a family where there's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, being in a family or a culture where there's lots of chronic invalidation and shaming, then children begin to learn to say, what I'm feeling in my body is not safe. There's a risk to what I'm feeling. And they start to distance themselves. So healthy sexuality is thwarted because the adults raising kids in this culture need them to conform to biblical teachings and not actually to what their own bodies are. So growing up in this world, I was taught a lot in really flowery, lovely language that to be really close to God and close to Jesus, you had to make sure that you were as free as you could be from sin. And sin were very clear and specific actions. Sex is one of them, but there was whole other categories as well, like even the way you spend your free time or how you go shopping or what clothes you buy and things like that. And so some people are raised in this intergenerational evangelical family line, and it really cripples in some ways people from having, unless they step out of that community, having the ability to really think deeply about the things that they're hearing and saying. Authentic expressions of self become risky unless they are in line with what the Bible teaches. And by the way, to just tweak that a little bit, not only what the Bible teaches, but what that specific congregation is teaching. And so I grew up on the East Coast in a highly educated part of the country, pretty liberal. And even a lot of, some of the congregation members would consider themselves liberal. And yet the teachings were always the same about sex. And so there was a lot of disconnect between the way it sounded so lovely and so educated. And so, if you love God, this is just what we do. And generation after generation of people in the family are raising their kids this way. There's really not a lot of ability for children to question or say, but wait, that doesn't feel right. Or wait, I don't understand, things like that. There's not a lot of room or permission. There's something that happens to the adults in that environment where they start to feel very threatened around sexuality. They start to feel like my child expressing, or my preteen or my teen expressing anything sexually is going to lead them potentially to sin. And if we lead them to sin, then that could potentially lead to, eternal damnation. So even besides sexuality, to tell a child that they could be separated from the love of their parents or the love of God eternally is actually, and can be for some children, trauma enough. Just a really quick uh, just concept that we talk about in my field a lot is called betrayal blindness. And what betrayal blindness is, it's a concept given to us by Jennifer Fried. It basically says that as social creatures, we are creatures that are wired socially. We need to be in groups, and we need to be in a family, and we need to be in community. And if the community or the family has certain beliefs, or does certain harmful things to one another, your brain actually dissociates from what's happening, and it protects the relationship between parents. So children are completely dependent on their parents. We all started off that way. And nothing is more threatening than the feeling or thought of separation from either parents, and in religious communities, God, because you're taught that God is basically your ultimate parent. And so, at a very young age, you're really taught to see God as the only source of true information, not your body. And then you also have generations then of people who have not been allowed to explore themselves sexually, who are raising up the next generation. So I just wanted to give you a couple examples of what I learned as a preteen and a teen, that is very classic purity culture. So the first thing I learned constantly is that sexuality isn't safe, and that women aren't safe because they create longing and desire in men, and that men aren't safe because they can't control their sexual drives, which you can see is massively problematic for rape culture and things like that. But imagine, as a little boy, you're being taught you can't control yourself around women. Women are going to make you stumble. You're going to want to have sex before you're married. You're going to want to do all sorts of things. And then women are told your body is almost like a dangerous and could lead men to sin, and could lead you to leave the church. And so the example I was told by my leaders in the church at that time, you're in youth group, and so this one was like from the youth leaders, was that anytime there was an activity or event that involved beach or water, I'm not even joking, we were all not allowed to wear bikinis. We had to wear one pieces, or we had to wear something that even covered that. And then, when you were actually at the event itself, there was this odd feeling of like, is there something wrong with me? Like, you'd see other people in bikinis, or you'd see other people more open with their sexuality, and you'd think that either they're bad or there's something bad with me. And so that was something that was taught to me in a number of different ways. The bikini example is just one, that our sexual drives are not safe. The second one is actually something I heard. I went to public school most of my life, but for high school, I went to a private Christian school. And so I heard this at church, but I also heard it at the private Christian school too, which is your virginity is more important than anything. Your virginity, especially as a woman or as a girl, is something that you need to protect. And so this is where like some of the purity ring stuff comes from. We're not going to go into that one as much, although if someone would like to talk about it, that's fine. But basically, it was a really huge fear to break this promise we have with God and have sex before we're married. It was seen as a really big break of trust. In fact, I'm pretty sure most people are having sex before marriage, but no one ever talked about it. And those that were doing that or having any sexual exploration were incredibly torn inside, and there was so much guilt. So another example I was taught, and I'll give you a few, was that my virginity is like toothpaste in a toothpaste bottle. The minute it's squeezed out, it can never go back in, and you're ruined, basically. A similar one I was told was, you're like a flower, and if you leave the flower in the ground and let it bloom, it'll last longer. But if you have sex and lose your virginity, like a flower, you will die. Really dramatic stories where we all walked away feeling like, wow, why does God care so much about this? Like we actually had to talk about this stuff so much. Another example was they would glue two pieces of construction paper together, different colors. Let's choose purple and yellow. And they would say having sex is like gluing two pieces of construction paper together. You can never rip it off and get a clean sheet of paper ever again. Your soul and their soul are tied together. They are one forever. Some people even worried that, if it didn't work out with the partner and they needed a new partner, that maybe who would they be with in heaven? And because they've already had sex with somebody. So it really led you down a lot of really weird bunny trails. And then the last one comes from my clinical work, which is clients came to me, in the first few years of my work, I saw more Christian clients than I do. Now I see, pretty much clients, whatever religious background or non-religion is there. But I saw a really serious problem with new couples. Something else they tell you is that if you abide by God's rules and laws, then you will be rewarded with a healthy, happy sexual life with your marital partner. And I saw everything but that. I saw couples confused. I saw couples not knowing even how to have sex, not knowing how to talk about sex, not knowing how to say what they like and didn't like, feeling so constrained by our next slide, which is the theory and idea of complementarianism. So I really believe that purity culture in some way is this sort of pre-programming for complementarianism. And this book I got this quote from is from Linda K. Klein. I highly recommend her book. It's called Pure. And she said, it's the idea that there are two distinct genders that have equal worth in God's eyes, but very different roles and responsibilities and expectations on earth. The man is to be undeniably masculine, whereas the woman is to be irrefutably feminine and loving, and to lovingly consent and support the leadership of man. They complement each other, creating a perfect whole. But if either gender strays from his or her designated role, the balance upon which it is said the stability of the family, church, and society rests is in jeopardy. So, we live in a patriarchy. So it's not that much different. It's just religious patriarchy. It's where, and I'll show a picture in a second, but basically the idea is that God mandated that he's the leader of all of us human beings. And then the man is directly under him. And the wife and children are under the husband. And then animals and nature are under wife and child. So basically humans dominate the earth, man dominates woman, God dominates all. And again, in my congregation, they talked about it as if it was the most loving thing that could happen. They kind of said like, if the husband is following Jesus's role, he will learn to be a servant to his wife, and then his wife will happily reciprocate. But so often these couples are not, one, they don't want those roles, or it's not natural to them, and yet they've heard their whole life, I'm man, I must be masculine, I'm woman, I must be feminine, kind of thing. And so there was, as I was doing couples therapy with a lot of people, there's this constant tension between who God and the church is telling them to be and how they were feeling inside. And often as a counselor, it almost felt like touching on purity culture or touching on the complementarianism of it all was extremely threatening to people. So again, complementarianism is highly, like, it's pretty much what people go by in most congregations, most evangelical churches. You can read about it online. It's pretty incredible. People are really bought into it. Top-down power structures, defined roles. We're all serving God. The thing that they don't talk about, there's a lot more room for exploitation. I really loved, when I was deconstructing my own religious beliefs, I really loved the idea of egalitarianism. And I know that's something that we've definitely heard. It's sort of like the opposite. It says, hey, we're all connected. Members serve the collective. It's not just about one person or one leader or whoever the biggest honcho in power was. Everyone has equal rights. It's a discussion in communication with each other around what people want life to look like. There's no defined roles. People can kind of move into a more authentic self. And sex and identity are not rule bound or defined as rigidly as they are in complementarianism. So, lastly, and then I just want to, start the discussion too on how to begin healing from this is when the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems I saw in the community, was that people were just pretending to be pure. So there were some people that were really bought into it. Obviously, with the betrayal blindness, there was, in public at least, you definitely wanted to agree with what everybody else was saying. So if sexuality is only good if it's heterosexual between man and woman after marriage, then everything else is unpure. And because that's not true about human beings are just like, we created the categories of good and evil. Those aren't actually necessarily real. It then forces everyone who doesn't fit into that to either hide and mask their true selves, or to lie and just frankly do things, behind closed doors that they weren't admitting to in front of everyone else. Because if you admitted to it, then you were a sinner, and there was a lot of fear of being ostracized. And so the sad thing I saw, and some of what I worked through with some of my couples that I had seen at that time, was there's a lot of infidelity. There's so much demonization and judgment towards other people's sexuality. There's child abuse. There's addiction, lying, hiding, and masking, and not knowing who is safe and unsafe, and an underdeveloped sense of self and identity. And again, it was often felt like people just wanted to show purity, but there's actually, because we're human and we don't fit into those categories, they had to hide anything that might say. And then on top of that, people's sexuality starts to come out sideways. If you're told that it's bad and wrong, and yet you feel these really natural urges, then it does a lot of weird things internally to you. And people end up doing things that they might not even have to think about doing, without feeling so rigidly controlled. So lastly, and again, I know this is quick and we'll unpack it a little bit, but one of the best ways to start healing from this is to get yourself away from the community. And that's not as easy as it sounds. Some people don't have a place to go, the financial resources. Not everyone goes off and goes to college and then goes to, something on after that. And then, a lot of people don't want to leave their families, understandably. This is like how we're wired. We're wired to be in our families. And so even if it's not, I'm not saying cut off necessarily, that is one extreme end that some people have to go, but like, just get space, go to a different town, go to a different place, read some different books. Because what they teach you in that community is that the outside world is bad and that we should be scared of it. I can't tell you how many times I heard the word pagan. Pagan represents people who have open sexuality, basically. And so they taught us that, outside there's a lot of pagans. And so we don't want to, tempt ourselves. We don't want to fall away from God. And there's so much isolation. Isolation is killer. That will keep you stuck. And so whatever you can do to distance yourself. I also think it's incredibly valuable to look at the intergenerational legacy of how many of my ancestors were sort of raised this way, think this way, indoctrinated this way. It will help explain some of the really poor reactions that people will get from their family members once they've distanced themselves. But it also can give you a little bit of information about why you feel so ashamed or terrified to leave the community, especially if you're coming from a family that really adheres to this kind of stuff. There were families in our congregation that, they went, they listened, they believed some of it, but they weren't as bought in or sold as other families. And so you really want to look at that intergenerational legacy and address some of the betrayal blindness that you might be experiencing, where on the one hand, you want to be free, but on the other hand, you fear intense shame and alienation. And then the lastly is just to notice internally as you do your own exploring. Like, when I have a sexual urge or desire, how do I feel right after? Do I feel permission? Do I feel like, okay, I can explore this, I can think about this, I can engage this? Or do you feel scared, ashamed? Do you switch quickly? Does it bring up distress? And the distress is going to point to where the trauma is embedded, PTSD reactions, and it's really actually CPTSD, complex PTSD that people develop in purity culture because it's from the family. Beating heart, inability to speak, dissociation, which is a complete disconnection from the body, shame, guilt, all these things. What comes up when you think about sex and when you try to think about engaging your sexual self as a human being? So, Jeff, we're right at 7:30. um, if you want to come back on, I'm done with my slides. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And it was a really good dive into the topic. And I know it's challenging, and everybody's in a different place. And I think that I think you brought up some really, really good points about it. And I think there's a lot to think about. And so it's very interesting to think that something that was kind of designed around love, and because we think of that in some of these religious things, that it could turn into something traumatic and really difficult because of some of the teachings and the things that were expressed and everything. I think it's really challenging when you think about that, and it's sad because it's just sad to think that something that came out of something that is supposed to be built on love and belief in love and all of that could be so traumatizing. But I think you did a really good job of covering a lot of good information. So I had a couple questions that I thought were really good. Here's the first one. It is, so you talked about shame. Can you talk more about the role of shame in the healing process and how someone can begin to shift from shame to that self-compassion place that we want them to be in?
Yes, I'm glad we are talking about shame because it can often feel like shame is the most entrenched part of healing where it gets the most stuck. Like,
Mhm.
even if we cognitively know, I don't believe this stuff anymore, our hearts might still ring with shame.
Mm.
And so that's how you know it's a trauma response.
Mhm.
So a trauma response is something that really grips you. It doesn't let you go unless your story is shared, you're understood, you can really understand what trauma happened to you. And so first of all, I would really encourage the curiosity around the moment of shame. When is it happening? Why is it coming up? What does it feel like in your body? Trauma is stored in the body, and so you're going to feel your shame in your body. The other thing about shame is that it's a social emotion. So in the Christian circles, you're actually led to stay in the community through soft shaming. Some parents are really strict and they'll just, give it to their kids a lot harder than other parents who are actually just trying to raise their kids the best that they know how. But shame really is about threatening our attachment to God or our parents. It's saying, I don't know if I can be okay without my tribe. I don't know if I can be okay with disappointing the people that I'm around. And
Mhm.
so sometimes shame is about, like, there's a difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt is like, I made a mistake. I should feel guilty and make up for it. Shame is, I'm bad.
Mhm.
And so not only are you being taught directly through your leaders that your actions are bad, even if they don't use that language necessarily, being hellbound certainly scares the living, heck out of people. But you're also then in a family where if you want to discuss the concepts that you learn in church or whatever, it's shot down immediately. I remember an experience I had where I was in my deconstruction process, and I was with a group of people who were all from the past evangelical crew. And I said, yeah, I don't really think you need to wait to have sex till you're married. And the minute I said that, someone said, but that's what God wants for us to do, right? And I remember feeling like, oh my God, my answer to this is like going to make or break something here. And that's how shame feels. It's so serious. You feel so life and death about the choices you're making sexually with your body. And so, I can wrap this up too. I don't know if Jeff has something to add as well, but it's shame is about noticing, knowing that it's actually not about the way you think that's wrong. It's about your attachments to your family and whether or not you really feel free to explore, and then really sifting through what you learned and deciding if it really means something to you now. And I think the thing I wouldn't do as shame is to try to outthink it or to beat yourself up for it, but to notice it almost as like a part of your lived experience that you're trying to work through.
Definitely. And I think shame's such a big part of it. Lori had said, I feel like deconstruction has become a hot topic in many faith circles. Doing the inner work is so important. Reconstruction is possible, and it is a beautiful thing. And I know with my work with patients too, they're like, we're trying to work on them embracing and enjoying their sexuality within their loving relationship. And even though they're in a relationship that they're still involved in their church, they still in a relationship that their church supports, they're uncomfortable because they're like, that's dirty, that's wrong. And then when we pull it all apart, what I try to do, and I'm sure you do too, is I try to meet my patients where they are. And so I say, okay, I know your religion is monumentally important to me. Mine is monumentally important to me as well. So I understand that and I honor that. It's a big part of who you are. But let's go back to it and look. And when we actually went back and looked, even their church leaders were saying to them in the Bible different things. They were like, yes, it does say that sex is a beautiful gift that God gave us and we are to enjoy each other's bodies, but they're not, because they're so feeling so much shame around touch, and that's a dirty place on the body. This is wrong, this is right, even though now their church too is saying you are free to explore and enjoy and love each other and love the beautiful gift of sex that you've been given by God. So even when they're working within the space of that, shame slips in. They've set up so many walls because of the trauma and the difficulty and the things that they've learned. And I know you've heard this too. I mean, one person described with their culture that there were people outside the room when they were consummating the marriage who kind of converged on them afterwards to check sheets and just different things and maybe in the beginning these things were thought of as not being so, I'm sure they were not designed to be traumatic, but they can be so traumatic for our patients.
Yes. I heard a lot of weird stuff from adults, even when they were really trying to convince us to stay celibate. And actually, different church leaders that I respected would talk to us about their own sexual relationships with their partners, which was so inappropriate. We were just teenagers,
Mm,
but they
mm.
were trying to sell us so hard on, wow, we waited, or wow, our sexual relationship is so good. And, to a bunch of like ignorant teenagers who are just, wanting to hook up with people just to explore things,
And
and
you're
it just,
going, TMI, why are you telling us
yes.
this? I'm a teenager. I don't want to know about your sex life.
Absolutely. There's so many, whether it was intentional or not, so many boundary crossings. As
Mm,
much as sex was seen as bad, it was also glorified in a marital setting only.
mm-hmm,
And that was like sort of like the prize.
mm-hmm. We just did Dr. Kellogg joined me and we did something on non-penetrative sex and outer course. And again, same thing. Oh, the goal is always that's where you're headed. That's where it always goes. You're programmed to believe it's this. And then when challenges come up or difficulties and you're looking at it curiously and finding new ways of being sensual and sexual, it's scary. And you're like, that's not okay. I can't do that. When it's like, yeah, you can. And so I really think the curiosity that you brought up is so important, and the joy and the bliss. And what's so funny is in the Torah, in the Bible, joy and bliss are a big part of what's supposed to
I know.
happen, right?
Yeah.
That it seems
Yeah.
so counterintuitive to, you
Yeah.
know, to some of the readings that you're literally seeing about how important joy is.
Yeah.
So,
And like I said, nobody yelled at me. Nobody said, dirty girl. Nobody said like, they were like, this is about love. This is all about love. And I know not every church is like that. There's very much different kinds of congregations. And so it was hard to pinpoint why people felt so ashamed, even because they were kind of like, this is the right way. And look at all of us married people, we're happy. But like
Hmm.
what I said before, behind closed doors, the teenagers didn't get to see it. But behind closed doors, there was so much unhappiness.
Hmm.
And I think part of it is that it's created on a patriarchal structure, which is really like male dominated. And it's about control for some people much more than it's about God's love. I've definitely met some people where it's truly about God's love.
Hmm.
Um,
Definitely.
mhm. But I've met just as many where it's about control and it's about being that man at the top or being a good husband in God's eyes or whatever that meant.
Hmm.
But it ended up controlling everybody's choices.
Mm. So difficult, so difficult. I know for my patients too, I bring in a lot of, I love Brene Brown, who's a great shame researcher, and I use some of her work from Rising Strong, and then also The Gifts of Imperfection, Learning to Live a Wholehearted Life Again, because I think they need some tools to help them start over and get past the shame, and it can be so challenging. A couple other good questions let me give you. So, what are some of the criticisms of purity culture, and how have religious communities started to address or rethink it in recent years?
Well, that's a good question. But to be honest, I have so been out of purity culture for so long, thankfully, that I don't actually know what the current like what is happening in current communities. Because now I like my social circle just doesn't involve a lot of that. But some of the criticisms I think are just about, the way that basically like a book has dictated that the whole structure of society rests on this order from God, man, woman, child, animal, and that it's look at every level there's exploitation. Man doesn't own animals. Like
Mhm.
we're connected to the earth, we're connected to nature. We should care for it. No human being owns another human being. Even children, there's just so much more gentle parenting now, or other things that would help parents raise their children without fear and without shame. And
Mhm.
I'm raising a 4-year old right now, and I've caught myself several times, stepping back into my own childhood, wanting to use words like good and bad. It's just so embedded into your way of thinking that I've had to, just really catch myself over and over again and rewrite those scripts as I raise a young girl in this culture. But I am sorry that I do not have more of the like present day Christian stuff. But if you read Linda K. Klein, or if you follow the woman that I quoted in the beginning, they are actively in the culture and they are experts in it, basically.
Yeah, those are great resources. Another question that came up is, and I thought this was a good one. I think it's about partners. Oh, wait a second here. Actually, let me feed it in. And then it was, how can partners support someone who is deconstructing purity culture and learn to reconnect with their body and with pleasure? I thought that was a great
That's
question.
a beautiful question. Yes, and it's so caring. It's so caring. Well, I think some of it is that your partner's going to be having PTSD responses in sexual moments. And so what those look like are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight
Mhm.
or flight is when someone really gets terrified, but they have enough ability to not freeze and shut down, but their heart starts to race. They start to feel like they even either have to fight somebody else or have to run away from a situation. So, maybe your partner, you and your partner want to have an intimate moment and then a fight erupts. Or you're in the same position and your partner all of a sudden, starts to like get really agitated and want to run from the experience. Another example would be freeze, which is where a person actually feels too overwhelmed to fight or flee. They just shut down.
Mhm.
And so you might see your partner freezing, losing access to words, their body's shutting down, they're getting smaller, they can't move, they can't speak as well. You might be in an active sexual moment and you might all of a sudden feel like they're gone or something. And then the last one is mask. And this is where you're actually freezing inside. You're actually overwhelmed and terrified, but you feel like you have to perform to make the person you're with happy. And I would say this is going to be a big one, is that we all had to put on such real masks all the time so that the leaders could feel validated in what they were teaching. And so I can only speak as a woman, but lots of like smiles, lots of pleasantries, lots of making sure everyone's happy. And so you might not even know your partner's in fawn or wearing a mask. Maybe they're slipping into like wanting to please you more than they're feeling like, I don't feel safe. So first of all, it's helping them and you understand the difference between a trauma response that's happening versus just maybe feeling tired and stressed from your workday or something. And then once you and your partner can really talk about that and explore that, then really gently encouraging them to let you know when they're feeling triggered. And that's hard in of itself. Like there's even a lot of shame in saying I'm triggered.
Definitely.
But saying that can then help everyone say, okay, let's take a pause. Sex while triggered is not cool. It's very overwhelming. Could the couple take a minute and just like know that like, let's just take a pause on the sex and let's talk a minute. Do you need something, partner? Do you need space? Do you need a touch? Do you need a hug? Do you need to talk about what you're feeling? And hopefully the partner, as they're deconstructing, can tell you, yeah, like you touched me this way and my mind went here. And then naming it, and again, observing it with curiosity and compassion will then lead actually to more intimacy, which is awesome. It may not be sexual at first, but it will be emotional. And that is the seat, that's part of the seat of good sexual long-term relationships, is feeling emotionally safe. And so trauma responses, figuring out if your partner with them, if they're triggered, and then stepping away for a moment to co-regulate or re-regulate and letting them know we can either move forward after this or we can just wait until another time.
That's such good advice, because I know my patient yesterday was really sharing with me. She said, when I'm triggered and I'm traumatized, I can't talk. I can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And I said, that's okay. And she said, her goal, and it was really good because she articulated, my goal is that I don't want it to take me a couple days to get back to it. I'd start to like decreasing the amount of time when I'm ready to come back to it and talk about it and process it, because we've been working on her processing it with her partner. And she has been doing that, but she's like, I don't want it to take a week or a day or whatever. I'd like to get back to it. And so we've been working on that. But like she said, when I'm triggered, it's just so hard. And then she's like, and then I don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to express my emotions. And I reminded her, you do a fabulous job in my clinic of articulating what you're going through to me. And she's like, well, my emotions. So, we give them tools. Like I gave her a sheet of all the different emotions. I said, you can use this sheet if you want, whatever will help you to be able to articulate it. But I kept reminding her, you do a beautiful job of articulating it to me. I know you can do a beautiful job of articulating it to your partner too. You underestimate yourself, and you're incredibly brave to step back in and talk about it, because it's not easy after you've been triggered. So
no, it's very difficult.
I say,
what you're talking about is called the window of tolerance, where when you're healing from trauma, you're learning how to allow the traumatic memories to come back to you but stay present, which is hard.
really,
But that work really starts to open up your window for what you can handle in the future. And so the first time maybe you shut down for a week, and then maybe with time, if you keep at it with your providers, or with your partner, you'll find that window is, if there's love and non-shaming, will get more decreased over time. So you got to be really patient with yourself and really let yourself know, like, I'm not in control of being triggered. I'm not in control of having a trauma response. My body hijacks me because it thinks it's not safe. And so this is all about safety. And once you allow yourself to kind of know that and be triggered, then you give yourself more room to find safety, and then it'll start shortening the window of tolerance.
Definitely. I just put in the chat too, ASECT, because a lot of people are like, how do I find a provider? And if you go
Yes.
on asect.org, American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, you can hit the find a provider button and find people in your state, in your area. And now you don't have to live right by them. Sometimes you can do it over a distance or something in your state or something, but you can get wonderful people to help you. And this has been so great. I really have enjoyed every minute of it. I'm going to go to talk a little bit about and do a little bit of a centering exercise to get people in a different space. But before I do, is there anything else that you would like to share, Tovah, to summarize or complete what you'd like to say this evening? You've already said so much and summarized it beautifully, but if there's anything else, I want to give you that opportunity to share.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're all really capable of finding different safe spaces to explore these things away from our families. And it's not easy. It's a risk. It's a brave thing to do.
Mm,
Um, but I can't tell you how freeing it has been to actually throw off purity culture and
mm,
just realize that if I trust my body, it'll let me know what I need and I want sexually and in every other way. And that is the most incredible resource that we have is like our own bodies. And that what we're doing is we're just trying to remove the junk that got put in there instead of just pure natural healthy development. And so you guys got this. You can definitely do it, especially if I can do it, you can do it.
And I really want to thank you for that personal sharing that you did, because that's not always easy. We're caregivers, we're
Yeah.
all that, but you really shared some personal things and were vulnerable. And that was incredible. Speaking of brave, that was incredibly brave.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much. I know we have given you a lot of challenging things to think about this evening. So let's take a moment and pause and breathe with me. You know how we do here at this point in the podcast. The ability to be present in moments is a major component of mental wellness. Psychologist Abraham Maslow said the ability to be in the present moment, to be actually authentically in the present moment, is a major component of mental wellness. So find a comfortable position, whether you're seated, lying down, or standing with your feet planted on the ground if you can, or if you're laying, it's okay. But if you're sitting or standing, your feet firmly planted on the ground. If you have your shoes off, you can earth a little bit and be connected to the wood or cement or whatever's under you, the flooring. If you're able, gently close your eyes. Let your hands rest softly wherever they feel at ease. Now, take a slow, deep breath in. Let it fill your belly. And exhale gently, releasing any tension you may be holding. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. We like to hold tension in our jaw. Soften the space between your eyebrows, that little spot that's getting wrinkled. Soften it. Release any tension in the pelvic floor. Let go of anything you no longer need to carry in this moment. Bring your attention inward. This authentic you is always there. This breathing pattern, slow, deep breath in and gentle breath out, is always there to help soothe you. Notice your heart beating, quiet, steady, alive, miraculous. This is your body. This is your home. You are not broken. You are enough. Right here, right now. You deserve pleasure, connection, and love that honors who you truly are. Now, silently or softly, repeat these affirming affirmations. Why is it so true that I am allowed to take up space exactly as I am? Why is it so true that I am allowed to take up space exactly as I am? Why is it so true it is safe for me to explore and embrace my sexuality on my own terms? My body is worthy of love and tenderness. Why is it so true that I feel more at home in myself every day? Let these words settle into your body. Let them be true. And if they don't feel true yet, that's okay. Let this be the beginning. Take one final breath in. And as you exhale, imagine releasing anything and everything that no longer serves your healing. When you're ready, gently wiggle your fingers and toes. Gently open your eyes, knowing that you can return to this place of calm and compassion whenever you need to do that. Just go inward. It's always there. You take it with you everywhere you go. I know it's a lot this evening, and I so appreciate you joining us. Vic, can you tell us what's coming up next week?
In this episode, expert sex therapist and couples counselor Dr. Jennifer Lidner joins Dr. Jeff to explore how to keep the flame of passion alive in relationships. Discover the common challenges couples face in maintaining intimacy and desire, along with practical tips to reignite the spark and deepen your connection. Join us Tuesday, April 15th to learn more.
Wow, what a great evening. I know it was a lot. It was such good information. Thank you so much for sharing your personal and professional experience with us, Tovah, and your great tips on working your way towards healing. I so appreciate it. It was such a blessing to have you here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you all for being here. I know you have busy, crazy lives. We're so glad that you joined us this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whenever you come on the recording or whatever you did. We thank you for joining us, and have a blessed one.